I work at a half-priced voodoo store. Part 7. The Finale. Written by Voodoo Clerk. Keeping the door closed on my parents as they attempted to learn why I screamed, I finally convinced them that I had seen a giant spider and killed it. When I finally heard their footsteps walk away from the bathroom door, I took another look at myself in the mirror. There was no doubt that my eyes were replaced by buttons. I couldn't blink, not that I really needed to, and I could see much better than I could before. This would have been really nice if my eyes weren't fucking buttons. I was stuck. I had to learn more about Creole and learn how to defeat him before I turned into whatever the hell I was about to turn into. And I have to give it to you guys, mentioning that I should find Olivia's new mother. Unfortunately for me, I had no fucking clue where she lived. I pulled on my hair, trying to figure out where she could live, when I had an idea. All of the items that were on her original mother's body was sitting behind the counter at work. This included a cell phone and her wallet, where her ID would be. Great. Back into the lion's den. Suiting up in my hoodie and pulling the hood over my head quickly, I ran past my parents, shouting that I was late for work and booked it outside. I hope I can see them again someday. Making my way back to the shop, I gathered all the courage I could and walked inside, and was immediately confused when I saw nobody there. The office door was closed, and the basement door was locked shut as usual. Well, at least this part would be easy. Walking over to the counter, I fished around in the container of people's things, and soon found what I was looking for. Sophie, I said aloud, looking at the ID of Olivia's old mother, which contained her address, and it was within walking distance of here. Stuffing the ID into my pocket, I quickly turned to leave, and walked right into Creole standing behind me. You do look very distinguished with buttons, he cooed, grabbing my face with his hands and pushing the hood off of my head. Looking up at him, I shivered as he stared at me with a happy expression. You're looking quite pale these days. Are you sick, Travis? He asked, vague concern plastered all over that pale face of his. Looking down at my hand, I saw it was quickly becoming the shade of white he was. What the fuck are you doing to me? I shouted at him, pounding on his chest and finally shoving him off of my face, backing up away from him, and started to head towards the front door. I need a store clerk. You answered the advertisement, Travis, he said with a chuckle, picking up the voodoo doll of me from the counter, pulling a needle from his pocket and holding it back up to the doll's neck. I froze and looked at him with gritted teeth. Looking behind him, I feigned concern, making it look like Mary had broke free from the basement. He fell for it and looked back at the basement door. He did so, long enough for me to chuck Sophie's cell phone, which I had kept, right into his head, knocking his hat off and staggering him for a bit. Turning, I quickly fled out of the shop and started booking it towards the direction of Olivia's house. I was hoping that voodoo doll had a limited range on me, and luckily I think it did, as nothing happened to me as I ran into the neighborhood, panting and out of breath. I looked around to try to find the correct house, soon enough managing to find it and stumbling my way to the door, knocking on it hard. You work with Mr. King Creole, Olivia gasped when she opened the door for me, a look of confusion on her face when she saw me with button eyes and pale skin. Can I get button eyes too? I need to talk to your mommy, I said through exhausted panting. No wonder I almost failed PE all those times in high school. She nodded and let me into the house. I looked around and saw every single picture of the house was of Olivia and her new mother. Not a single one of Sophie existed. Damn, he is good. Oh dear God, came the soft and concerned British voice of Olivia's new mother. I looked up at her and stumbled towards her, grabbing her by the collar of her poofy black dress and shaking her, the desperation clear on my face. Help me! How do I stop this? I screamed, begging the woman to help me in any way that she could. I did not want to end up like Sophie or all those other people that Creole had killed. I know his real name, and I know who's trapped in the basement. Please tell me how to save myself, I shouted again. I do not know. If I speak ill of him, I may... She looked over to Olivia, who was playing in the living room, oblivious to us and in her own little world. She turned back to me and bit her lips. Go to this address, she said quickly, pulling out a notepad and scribbling on it. Please, tell me it isn't far, I begged. Having to run here had really wiped me out. It is, I'm afraid, but it is the only place that may help you, she said, tearing off the sheet of paper and handing it to me. I looked down at it and raised my brow. Isn't this right near the shop? Won't he know? I asked her, wondering if she was sending me on a suicide mission, but she shook her head and kept her hands together around the notepad. He does not go there anymore. You should be safe, she said. Then her face twisted into fear as she covered her mouth with her hands. The notepad fell to the floor as she backed away from me. I shivered as she did so, scared of what she could have seen. Why are you blushing, mister? Olivia asked me, her attention now on me and tilting her head in confusion. Was I blushing? I didn't feel hot enough for that. I pulled my phone out and looked at myself in the camera, and my heart sank in an instant. My cheeks were painted red, like a puppet's. I turned and ran out of the house, adrenaline up and completely in panic mode. He was turning me into a puppet, and if I didn't stop him soon, it was going to be over for me quickly. I had to find out more about him and maybe find a way to stop this in the process. Slowing down after a while, I made my way back towards the shop, but instead of making my usual left turn towards it, I continued forward and ended up at a decrepit old building. Just like the Voodoo shop. They really needed to fix up this part of town. The faded old letter read out library, only I had never seen nor heard of this library ever. Although, considering how it looked, I could kinda see why. Sighing and walking in with my head held high, I walked up the doors and found them completely sealed behind wooden doors. Luckily enough for me, there was a broken window right nearby, so I entered the building and began my search. I headed for the reference section, where I found much more information detailing things about Charles Sumner. And let's just say, it's a tale all right. Charles Sumner was born into a poor family, his dad dying of cholera and his mother having to raise him on her own. Luckily for the two of them, Charles' mother was a voodoo witch doctor and very well loved by the community. Charles, meanwhile, became a piano prodigy at the age of 7. He would go on to make a career out of it, and soon enough, by the time he was age 18, he was in his own band. Now, he wasn't a millionaire or anything, but it seemed like he was well off, and that's where Mary Simmons was the vocalist for Charles and his fiancée. While nice, this information didn't help me at all, and I was about to give up completely and just burn down the whole shop when I suddenly turned to the last page of the reference book I was reading on Charles, when in big black letters a headline was shown from a newspaper. Charles Sumner missing. Intrigued, I read as best as I could the old and decaying page of the book. Charles had gone out with his bandmates and had never returned home. I looked around and tried to find any other information on Charles, Mary, anybody, and then I found it. Mary Simmons and 6 others go missing, I read aloud when I found an ancient newspaper article about it. I looked up when I heard footsteps outside, but it was just some crackheads mumbling to one another. I went back to the paper and read it as best as I could. Mary had gone missing about 4 months after Charles did. I stroked my chin at that and looked back at the other books I had thrown around everywhere. His mother, I mumbled to myself, going on a hunch and trying to find a book or something on her if she was so beloved by the community, and I did. Although she retreated from public life after the disappearance of Charles, I did manage to find one interview she gave before then. She blamed Mary for Charles going missing. More importantly, the missing $10,000 he had won in a contest the night he went out. Gotcha, I said aloud, closing that book and trying to use my mind to piece some things together. Having a good read, son? Creole asked me, sending me flinching into a bookshelf and staring at him as he sat above me on the bookshelf across from me. A really good one, Charles, I shot back at him. The smile on his face disappeared when I called him that. He growled at me and hopped down to my level, grabbing me by the collar again and slamming me harder into the bookshelf. Don't call me that, he snarled, lifting up his fist to beat me, only for me to headbutt him and grab a book from the floor, striking my boss in the face with it and pushing him over. He tripped and fell to the floor, but stared back at me with anger in those buttons of his. What did Mary do? Why do you keep her trapped in the basement? I demanded to know, lifting the book over my head to hit him again. He looked at me with his sharpened teeth and got to his feet, fixing his tie and looking at me like I was a worm that he had just stepped on. Grabbing me once again by the collar, he stared into my button eyes with his own. That whore deserves everything I give her, he snarled, his teeth again growing sharp. In a pure rush of adrenaline, I grabbed his mouth by the stitches and yanked as hard as I could. I managed to rip out the entire length of his structure, causing him to drop me and stumble backwards. Gagging and coughing, he looked at me with a black ooze dripping out of his mouth, much quicker than it had before. Acting quickly, I ran at him and pushed him over with all of my weight. Fishing inside of his coat pockets as we both stumbled to the floor, I managed to pull out the two items I knew he needed: his spool of black thread and the key to the basement. Thanks, Charles, I shouted with a chuckle, standing up and booking it towards the library entrance. No pun intended there, surprisingly. I heard him scream and shout at me, but when I looked back, he was struggling to stand up. Clearly, ripping those threads out of his mouth did something to him. Good thinking, adrenaline fueled me. Making it out to the window I had gone through, I sighed hard as I looked down at my arms, still pale as him, but they had stopped at my elbows, meaning I had bought myself some time from all of that. Sighing hard, I knew what I had to do. I was going in the basement. Armed with a key and a rusty pipe I stole from the outside of the library, I started walking towards Old King Creole's. A million things were going through my mind at that moment. Thoughts about Charles, what had happened to him, and what was going to happen to me. Opening the door to the shop, everything was dead and silent. Even the rusty bell was much quieter than it usually was. Looking at the wall of voodoo dolls, I saw that they were starting to rot and fall off of the shelves. I must have really weakened him. Renewed by this, I strode towards the basement and stopped. His office. I looked over to it and changed my course to look through it. Maybe there was something in there. Going into the clean office, I saw most of what I had seen the first time. A tidy office and scratched out pictures. Only this time, I paid attention to the pictures, seeing that indeed these were of Charles and Mary. Opening up his office desk, I didn't find much of anything. Countless buttons and threads, as well as several pair of gloves. About to leave, I saw on his desk a picture that wasn't completely scratched out stood prominently. A picture of young Charles Sumner and his mother, Mother Creole. Looking out of the office and towards the basement door, I knew that all of my answers would come from down there. Walking over there, I finally inserted the key and turned it, opening the door and staring down into the depths. Taking my phone out and turning on the flashlight, I made my way down there. The rickety old wooden steps creaked with every one of my footsteps. I looked to the ceiling and to the floor as I made my way down, passing several bones and articles of clothing on my way down. I was in the basement after all of this time. And it was as freaky and as gross as I'm sure you guys imagined it. Decaying and rotting bodies laid everywhere, some hung up by strings like puppets, and others clearly having been chewed on by something. And that something soon caught my attention. The sound of crunching porcelain turned my attention to the corner of the room, where Mary sat, looking up at me in horror. He's gotten to you too, she whimpered softly, curling up into the fetal position. I made my way over to her, bone trained on her cracked and broken body. I kept my pipe in my hand just in case she got any ideas. What happened to him? Obviously, he didn't just wake up like that, as I did. I demanded to know, keeping a distance from her and waiting for the answer. She curled up tighter, obviously not wanting to spill her beans, but finally she spoke up. I cheated on him, she mumbled, looking up at me with one eye she had. Her face was cracked and her right eye was missing, but the other shone off the flashlight I had trained on her. He was a nice guy, and when he asked me to marry him, I caved. But I was already seeing someone else. A mobster, she mumbled softly. And you wanted to make him disappear and steal that $10,000? I asked, sort of siding with Creole Charles on this one. No, that wasn't the plan at all. I told Henry that I just wanted him to get scared and leave town. Henry and his goons took it too far, she said quickly, looking up at me and lunging out, grabbing me and shaking me quickly back and forth. I didn't tell them to torture him. Wait, torture? I asked quickly, shoving the porcelain doll off of me, holding my pipe up to get her back from me. She looked fragile, but something had to be chewing on all of those corpses down here, and she was the only living thing down here. Yes, those stupid idiots, she mumbled, starting to cry, and looked up at me, holding her two hands up and rubbing her messy hair around. They tortured him, beat him, ripped his eyes out of his head, and cut his head off when it was all said and done, she explained, looking up at me for some sort of sympathy. What, you were just going to fuck him up and steal his money? I don't believe you for a second. He's done horrible things to people, but if you caused that to happen to him, you're no better than he is, I said with a huff. It didn't make any sense. Not the way she put it, at least. What? But... She obviously began trying to fix her lie, but she gave up inside, rubbing her cracked face and nodding behind her hands, looking back up at me with an exhausted face. Fine, I wanted to get rid of him, but I wasn't strong enough to just come out and say I didn't love him anymore. He spent every single moment of his time playing gigs, which I had to sing in, and I hated it. I hated all of that. So when Henry came and swept me off my feet, I decided to be selfish for once in my life, she shouted back at me, stumbling to her feet and staring at me with daggers in her single eye. Guess you didn't expect him to come back as a vengeful voodoo ghost, I snickered, backing up from her and heading back towards the stairs. She followed me, the anger still obvious in her face. If Henry hadn't done such a shit job of hiding his body, his mother wouldn't have discovered it and turned him into that freak, she mumbled, turning and looking around the walls that she must have looked at for almost 100 years now. Now I'm nothing but his punching bag, she sighed, looking back at me with a hopeless expression. He fixes me, then breaks me over and over again, she despaired. I'm sorry, Mary. I really am. But at the same time, you aren't some innocent victim, I responded, looking down at my phone when it vibrated. An unknown number, although I knew exactly who it was. No, I said softly. Sorry, Travis, my boy. Your luck's run out, the familiar voice said to me, before something struck me on my head and I lost all control of my body, flopping to the floor and passing out. His nice dress shoes coming into view, just as I lost consciousness. Wakey, wakey, son, Creole hummed, smacking me hard on the face with a glove, snapping me awake and looking around. I instantly tried to move, but I found myself stuck and trapped. I looked around and saw that I was still in the basement, only I was tied to a table. You gonna cut me in half? I asked, groaning at the stinging pain in my head, looking at him and realizing that he had lost an eye, then seeing he'd used the thread from that eye to sew his mouth back up. Unfortunately not. I do need you to be somewhat intact, he sighed, walking over to me and tapping my nose, smiling as he pulled away. No, Travis, my boy, I do in fact need you alive. Well, sort of, he chuckled, slamming a heavy bag onto the table, on top of my leg, causing me to cry out in pain. Charles, please, he doesn't deserve this. Mary's soft voice spoke up, causing Creel to stop his searching in the bag and look off into a direction I couldn't focus on. Grabbing the pipe I had equipped myself with, he walked out of my field of view, although the sound of breaking porcelain was more than enough for me to understand what he was doing to her. Sorry about that, he returned with a chuckle, dropping the pipe on the floor and searching through the bag once again, smiling nice and wide when he finally found the item that he was searching for, pulling out an ancient drill, the kind you need to crank to be able to use. What are you going to do to me? I asked him, pulling on my restraints that held me firmly down on the table, trying to escape him. He looked at me with a wide and happy smile as he placed the drill on my exposed palm. I need a permanent employee, someone who can work hard and never ever take breaks or refuse an order. If you had been a good little boy and just followed my orders, I wouldn't have to do this step, but you just had to start snooping, didn't you? He sighed, starting to drill into my hand. I'm not ashamed to say that I screamed. I screamed and I begged. I thrashed and tried every possible way to try to escape. It wasn't so bad with the second hand. I think I was passing out from the blood loss by that point. The feat, luckily enough for me, was a walk in the park compared to the drill into my hands. As I struggled to stay conscious, I saw that he had begun to tie thick pieces of string into the holes of my hands and feet. You'll make a fine addition to the crew, Travis. You practically look the part, he giggled, his voice distorted as I slipped in and out of consciousness. Although the feeling of something sharp and cold on my throat brought me back to reality, he had a hacksaw over my neck. Wait, no, I sputtered out, my voice slurred from all of the blood loss, trying to protest but too weak to move at all. Sorry, son, this is the only way to grant you immortality. Lucky enough for me, my head was still intact enough for my mama to bring me back to life, so you'll be nice and easy. Just a quick dip in that solution I have whipped up, and you'll be a new man. He chuckled, pressing the hacksaw harder against my throat and starting to saw into me. The first few goes were on a scale of pain that you could never imagine, but by the time he cut into my spinal cord, I was already dead. Wakey, wakey, son. You've got to stop falling asleep on me. Creel's soft and loving voice spoke to me as I regained my consciousness. I looked around and saw that I was sitting up on the table. I looked down at myself, startled when I saw I was in my own black suit. My tie was red, unlike Creel's purple. I'm alive? I asked, looking over at him and touching my throat, finding a long row of stitches all across my throat like his. Yes, indeedy, son, he chuckled, smacking my back and pulling my attention over to a large black cauldron nearby. Mama's old recipe. A quick dip of your head in there, and you can kiss mortality goodbye, he chuckled, pulling me to my feet and helping me stand straight. I shivered at the thought that I had been dead, but even more so when I looked down at the strings tied to my hands and feet. What am I? I asked him, looking over at him and wanting to cry, despite my clear lack of eyes. He looked back at me with a big yellow smile, pulling me close with his arm around my neck. You're my store clerk, son, and my own personal puppet, he chuckled, lifting up a mirror and showing me myself. I did start crying then, even if no tears came up. My face was pale, and my cheeks bright red and vibrant. My normally messy hair was nice and combed downwards. Now you're going to work with me here. Forever, he chuckled, stepping back and smiling as he motioned for me to go up the stairs. I looked up at the stairs and refused to take a single step until the string tied around me went tight and some unforeseen force began to force me up the stairs. I tried to fight it. I tried so hard. I tried running out the door, running far away into the arms of my parents so that I could wake up from this nightmare, but I had no such luck. That force made me go to my counter and stand there. Just stand there, unable to move. I just want to go home, I mumbled, still crying as Creel made his way back upstairs, looking my way with a smile and a chuckle. Now, Travis, we can't have a sad store clerk. Let's fix that, he tisked, snapping his fingers and smiling at me. Of course not, King Creole, sir, I said happily, saluting him and smiling back at him. My mouth and body may have said that, but my mind was screaming and wanting to strangle him with the strings keeping me held upright. Attaboy, Creel hummed, clapping his glorified hands together and heading into his office, leaving me standing there with no way to sit down or do anything. Just stand there and smile like a fucking idiot. I can only control myself at night when he locks the shop and spends all of his time down in the basement. I'm allowed to sit and do whatever I want, but the second I approach the door, my invisible handler forces me back to my post. This is my life now, the puppet in King Creole's sick little games. All I can do is smile and thank you for coming in. I can't scream for help or anything. I'm trapped here, and I can't find any way out. Help me. Please help me. And make sure to visit Old King Creole's half-price voodoo shop. We have everything you could ever want. King Creole is a lovely boss and is more than happy to grant any wish you could ever want. And I'm more than happy to clean up anything that you leave behind. Hey there everyone, I want to say thank you so much for clicking on my video and listening to the story all the way through to the end. This was the finale, the last story of the half-priced voodoo shop. This truly is one of my favorite stories on Reddit, and I was so happy to record this and share it with other people. I love the creepiness, and I love the story behind it, the depth in the characters, really, mostly with, King Creole. I wonder what's going to happen next. I've heard that there is another series written by Voodoo Clerk, and so I'm hoping that if this goes well and enough people interact with this video, hitting like, sharing it, commenting, that I'll be able to do the second series as well. Now, I haven't read the second series, but I am more than excited to try to check it out if people really like this one. So if you're interested in hearing that, if you're interested to see where this story might go on, comment down below. Tell me about it. Tell me that you want to hear it, that you want more. Share stories with me. Tell me your thoughts on this one. The theories that you have of what could possibly be happening next to Travis. And if you like this video and you want to see more like it, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. It's going to let you know every time a new video comes out. So until next time, everybody, be safe out there.